He ordered his left wing forward, transforming a localized Roman success into a full encirclement. Now, Philip's phalanx was fighting on two sides simultaneously, its front locked in brutal frontal combat, while its flank bled out under Roman gladiae. What began as a controlled advance turned into a nightmare beyond comprehension. The men in the rear ranks of the phalanx couldn't see what was happening ahead. They kept pushing forward according to training, forcing their own comrades into Roman blades. The phalanx, that perfect military machine that had conquered the known world, had become a trap that killed its own warriors. Roman battle horns sounded through the fog, their notes steady, calm, almost cruel in their measured rhythm. Each signal meant a new tactical adjustment. Each blast tightened the noose. The legions moved as coordinated units, shields slamming forward in perfect synchronization, gladiae stabbing in short, brutal motions that wasted no energy. There was no elegance, no honor, no glory, just industrial efficiency applied to murder. The ground turned into a slaughterhouse floor slick with blood that froze into crimson ice patches. Men slipped on the gore of fallen comrades, fell, and never rose again. The battle cries that once echoed Alexander's conquest now became screams begging for mercy that wouldn't come. Philip's warhorse reared as arrows hissed overhead, nearly throwing the king into the carnage below. He tried desperately to rally his men, but everywhere he looked, the legendary phalanx had ceased to exist. It was no longer a formation, no longer a military unit, just fragments of terrified men fighting individual battles for survival against an enemy that had learned exactly how to kill them. Philip hesitated, a king's pride warring against survival instinct and the certainty of death. Then finally, with words that tasted like poison, he gave the order that ended 2 centuries of Macedonian military dominance: retreat. That single word shattered what the Roman gladiae hadn't yet destroyed. Warriors who might have died fighting for victory fled to save their lives. The retreat became a rout, organization dissolved into panic, and the fog that had hidden the battle's beginning now concealed its catastrophic end. Flamininus didn't pursue far, he was too calculating for that. Chasing fleeing enemies into fog could scatter his own formations and waste the victory he'd achieved. Instead, he held position and watched as morning sun finally burned through the mist, revealing the battlefield's terrible truth. The hills of Cynoscephalae were carpeted with Macedonian dead. Thousands of corpses, their 18-foot sarissas broken into kindling, their bronze helmets face down in mud and frozen blood, their bodies twisted in the final contortions of violent death. For Rome, this wasn't merely a tactical victory. It was a demonstration of military evolution. The ancient world had witnessed something unprecedented. The unbeatable formation had met its end on a nameless hillside in Thessaly. From that day forward, no army anywhere in the known world would ever fight the same way again. The age of the phalanx, that rigid, magnificent, mathematically perfect killing machine, was over. The age of the adaptable legion had begun. When the sun finally broke through clouds and burned away the last of the fog, the battlefield looked like the end of civilization itself. The morning mist that had hidden such carnage now revealed war's true face. A landscape of shattered weapons, scattered shields still bearing the symbols of Macedonian kings, and bodies that would never move again. Crows arrived first, circling overhead in patient spirals. Then came the wind, blowing across the hills of Cynoscephalae, carrying with it the copper smell of blood and the acrid stench of death. No victory songs, no triumphant shouts. Just the sound of boots on wet ground, and the ragged breathing of survivors too exhausted to celebrate. Flamininus rode among the fallen, his armor spattered with blood, not all of it belonging to enemies. He surveyed the field in contemplative silence, studying the bodies of men who had fought so fiercely defending a military tradition already obsolete. The Macedonians had come to defend Alexander's way of war, but that way had ended here in frozen mud and morning fog. The world had changed, and Rome was now its language. Philip the Phalanx had escaped, taking with him a few thousand survivors too shocked to understand they'd lost more than a battle. They'd lost the myth of Greek invincibility, the belief that their civilization still set the standard for military excellence. In the days following Cynoscephalae, Flamininus sent messages across Greece, words he framed as peace offerings, but which every Greek city understood were declarations of new reality. He called assemblies in Corinth, Delphi, and Athens, speaking to crowds in words carefully chosen to make them cheer. Greece, he proclaimed with perfect sincerity, is free. Free from kings, free from tyrants, free to live as she once did in her golden age. The crowds erupted. Men shouted themselves hoarse. Women threw flowers. Temple bells rang in celebration. For one intoxicating moment, it felt as though the glory of classical Greece had returned from its grave. But those who looked beyond the spectacle could see the truth written in Roman faces. The legions still occupied strategic positions. Roman governors still made the real decisions. Roman tax collectors still moved through the cities tallying wealth. Freedom, it seemed, now wore armor stamped with SPQR. Flamininus meant his words, at least he believed he did. He genuinely admired Greek culture, philosophy, art, and architecture. But admiration isn't equality. Rome gave Greece back its cities while taking away its independence. In taverns and temples, people whispered the new truth. The Romans came as friends and stayed as masters. Greek poets wrote songs celebrating liberation, but in their verses, the heroes no longer wore battle armor. They wore chains, silver chains, beautiful chains, but chains nonetheless. Flamininus returned to his command tent that evening and stood looking out over the hills where thousands had died to prove a point about military evolution. Fires burned in the distance where the dead still lay unburied. There were too many corpses for quick disposal. The wind whispered through grass like the voices of those who would never speak again. He had given Greece its freedom, but somewhere in his calculating mind, he understood the deeper truth. Rome didn't grant freedom. Rome replaced it with something that looked similar but tasted different. The silence following Cynoscephalae wasn't peace. It was the sound of an old world dying and a new one being born in blood. History doesn't end with battles, it echoes, sometimes for centuries. And the echo of Cynoscephalae carried across the ancient world like a warning bell that could be heard from Hispania to Syria. The age of Greece had ended. The age of Rome had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. News of the victory spread with shocking speed. Messengers rode from city to city carrying word that Philip had been defeated, that the mighty Phalanx, Alexander's weapon, the formation that conquered Persia, had been broken by men wielding shorter swords. To Romans, it was proof their system was superior. Not their courage or their gods, but their training, their adaptability, their willingness to learn and evolve. The legion was born not from heroes, but from systematic thinking. It was empire as machine, and Cynoscephalae had proven that the machine could crush even glory itself. Do you see the significance? This wasn't just Rome defeating Macedon, it was rationality defeating tradition, adaptation defeating rigidity, the future destroying the past. In Rome, senators celebrated with elaborate ceremonies. Priests sacrificed white bulls to Jupiter. Poets praised Flamininus as the liberator of Greece, comparing him to heroes of legend. But across the Aegean, the feeling was profoundly different. In Athenian markets and Spartan training grounds, men spoke in hushed voices, unsure whether to mourn or celebrate. The victory that freed Greece also chained her to a new master whose grip would prove far tighter than Macedon's ever was. For centuries, the Greek phalanx had symbolized civilized order. Men standing shoulder to shoulder, each trusting his brother beside him, strength found in unity and discipline. But the Roman legion was something fundamentally different. It wasn't a wall, it was motion. It wasn't tradition, it was innovation. It wasn't glory, it was purpose. And purpose, in the end, always defeats glory. Greeks fought for honor and legacy. Romans fought for domination and efficiency. One way inspired poetry, the other conquered continents. Years passed. Philip remained on his throne, but his kingdom was a hollow shell. He swore loyalty to Rome, sending tribute and hostages, including his own son Perseus. Perseus would one day rise against Rome as his father had, and would fall even harder, crushed at Pydna in 168 BC, ending the Macedonian kingdom forever. Meanwhile, Rome grew stronger with each passing year. They studied every battle, analyzed every victory, learned from every failure. They absorbed Greek culture, its tactics, philosophy, art, architecture, and then made all of it Roman. Greek generals wrote treatises about courage and honor. Roman commanders wrote manuals about logistics and efficiency. From the ashes of Greece's greatness, Rome built something colder but far more durable. An empire of laws rather than legends, of roads rather than myths, of armies that could march anywhere, fight anyone, and endure everything. Greek philosophers wrote eloquently about fate and destiny. Romans called it duty. Both meant the same thing: inevitability. The echo of Cynoscephalae reached far beyond Thessaly. It resonated in Carthaginian war councils where generals began to fear Rome's unstoppable advance. It reached Syrian and Egyptian palaces where kings whispered about forming alliances that could never hold. And it reached the heart of every soldier who still believed in old ways, telling them that time itself was now Rome's ally. No empire truly dies in one day, but every empire has a moment when it begins to fade. For Greece, that moment came on a fog-covered hillside where rigid perfection met adaptable chaos and lost. The spears of Alexander had pierced the world, but at last the world had learned how to pierce back, and somewhere beneath those quiet hills, among the rusting sarissas and shattered helmets, slowly being reclaimed by earth, the echo of that day still lingers. The sound of an age ending and another taking its place in the eternal turning of power. Flamininus returned to Rome as a conquering hero. Statues were raised in his honor. Songs celebrated his name. His victory at Cynoscephalae was carved into monuments that would stand for centuries. But even he couldn't have imagined that his tactical triumph was not the end of a war, but the beginning of an empire that would outlast time itself. Within a century, Rome would rule all of Greece. Within 2 centuries, Rome would dominate the entire Mediterranean. Within 5 centuries, Rome would control the world that once belonged to Alexander. Yet for all its glory, even Rome would one day hear its own echo fade. For every sun that rises must eventually set, and every empire, no matter how mighty, must one day stand where Philip stood that terrible morning, on a hillside, watching fog roll in, wondering if the age of its world has just ended. Because history doesn't stop. It only changes hands in an endless cycle of rising and falling powers. And in that eternal turning, the hills of Cynoscephalae still whisper their lesson to the wind, that every age of conquest ends not with thunder and glory, but with silence and the sound of marching boots heading toward a future that belongs to someone else. The Phalanx was perfect. And perfection, history teaches us, is always the first thing to break when the world changes around it. Because survival belongs not to the strongest or most glorious, but to those who can adapt when fog rolls in and the ground shifts beneath their feet. Now you've witnessed the moment ancient military history pivoted forever, when rigid perfection met adaptable chaos and the entire world changed in a single foggy morning. If this story of civilizations rising and falling ignites something in you, if you want to explore more battles where the impossible became possible, and military evolution rewrote the rules of power, then subscribe to Flow of History right now. We bring you deep into the moments when empires learned they weren't immortal, when legendary formations met their match, when the ancient world discovered that nothing, no matter how perfect, lasts forever. Join us as we uncover the shocking truths hidden in history's greatest turning points. Hit that subscribe button for Flow of History, because the next epic tale of empires colliding is coming soon, and you won't want to miss it.